Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with the solar theory. A short analysis of the compound and single elements of science as against the occult teachings. How far scientific is this theory as generally accepted? In his reply to Dr. Gull's attack on the theory of vitality, connected inseparably with the elements of the ancient in the occult philosophy, Professor Beale, the great physiologist, has a few words as suggestive as they are beautiful. There is a mystery in life, a mystery which has never been fathomed, and which appears greater the more deeply the phenomena of life are studied and contemplated. In living centers, far more central than the centers seen by the highest magnifying powers, in centers of living matter where the eye cannot penetrate, but towards which the understanding may tend, proceed changes of the nature of which the most advanced physicists and chemists fail to afford us the conception. Nor is there the slightest reason to think that the nature of these changes will ever be ascertained by physical investigation, inasmuch as they are certainly of an order or nature totally distinct from that to which any other phenomenon known to us can be relegated. This mystery, or the origin of the life essence, occultism locates in the same center as the nucleus of prima materia, for they are one, of our solar system. The sun is the heart of the solar world system, and its brain is hidden behind the visible sun. From thence, sensation is radiated into every nerve center of the great body, and the waves of the life essence flow into each artery and vein. The planets are its limbs and pulses. That is not entirely incorrect. The only thing that I would differ is that the sun is not the emanation. Well, it is not the origination point. It is an emanation point. It is transferring energy from a further point out in space that we don't see, that we don't know where it is. We may see it, but we don't know where it is. And so that's the differentiation for me and them. I don't believe in the invisible sun theory that they have, and so that is going to definitely set us apart. But the sun does drive all life in this solar system, and even though it is merely relaying the energy, it is the emanation point for that life force here. It was stated elsewhere in the Theosophist, that occult philosophy denies that the sun is a globe in combustion, but defines it simply as a world, a glowing sphere. The real sun is being hidden behind, and the visible being only its reflection, its shell. The Naismith willow leaves, mistaken by Sir J. Herschel for solar inhabitants, are the reservoirs of solar vital energy. It is plasma filaments which are discharging, and we talked about that yesterday. There are filaments on the sun. Sometimes they snap and they can cause severe destruction. They are not reservoirs. The vital electricity that feeds the whole system. The sun, in abscontio, being thus the storehouse of our little cosmos, self-generating its vital fluid and ever receiving as much as it gives out. That is true, right? But not in the way that it is being stated here. Right? It is receiving and it is giving out. That is true. But this is saying that it is a self-generating vital fluid, and that is not true. It is a transfer point. And of course, that is my speculation. Based upon science, right? We've talked about many times. If you go to my page on YouTube, you can find the Thunderbolts Project linked. and the visible sun only a window cut into the real solar palace and presence, which reflects, however, faithfully the interior work. Thus, there is a regular circulation of the vital fluid throughout our system, of which the sun is the heart. The same as the circulation of the blood in the human body. No, during the manvanteric solar period or life, it is not like blood. It is like the electrical impulses that is your brain telling your fingers to move. It is like that. It is exactly like that, but it is not like blood. Blood contains it. That is true. It is part of blood, but it is not blood. It doesn't replace blood. It is not the same as blood. The sun contracting as rhythmically at every turn of it as the human heart does. Again, no. Only, instead of performing the round in a second or so, it takes the solar blood 10 of its years, and a whole year to pass through its auricles and ventricles before it washes the lungs and passes thence to the great veins and arteries of the system. That is entirely speculation based upon nothing. This, science will not deny. Yes, they will. Since astronomy knows of the fixed cycle of 11 years, where the number of solar spots increases. It is not 11 years. There is a grand solar minimum. There is a grand solar maximum. And that does, in fact, affect the number of sunspots that we see. It influences the number of filaments that are attached to the sun. It does. Coronal mass ejections, all of that is affected by that cycle. But the cycle is closer to 15 years than to 10. Footnote on increases. Not only does it not deny the occurrence, though attributing it to a wrong cause, as always, each theory contradicting every other, and once again we will point out that this was when we did not have a great understanding of the sun, or even as great of an understanding as we have now, because we still do not fully understand it. We still do not know fully the makeup of it. We have guesses, and that is all they are. I see the sun more as a welding rod than a combustion source. I don't think it's out there just burning. We talked about that yesterday as well. There's no oxygen. There can be self-creating oxygen contained within the sun, but it is highly unlikely. The oxidation process would take place a lot faster if it was producing its own oxygen. What we are seeing is like a welding rod being grounded. It is a spark of electrical current passing through this point. Each theory contradicting every other. But we have the lens, that's where I was going with this. We have the lens of history to look back on. We are 150 years in the future from her. We have satellite technology. Yes, we have been to space. Yes, we are able to see the sun in real time, right? We have several satellites, a couple of GOES and some other ones up there that take pictures of the sun every day. You can look at it every single day and see how it works every single day, and we still don't have a full understanding of it. So yes, the theories did indeed contradict each other because they were trying to understand something. But you're attributing it to a wrong cause, as always, is wrong. The spots, depending on the superficial accumulation of vapors cooler than the photosphere, wrong, like fully and emphatically wrong, etc., etc. But we have men of science who astrologize upon the spots. Professor Jevons attributes all the great periodical commercial crises to the influence of the sunspots every 11th cyclic year. See his investigations into currency and finance. This is worthy of praise and encouragement, surely. When the number of solar spots increases, which is due to the contraction of the solar heart, the universe, our world in this case, breathes, just as man and every living creature, plant, and even mineral does upon the earth, and as our globe itself breathes every 24 hours. No, the dark region is not due to the absorption exerted by the vapors issuing from the bosom of the sun and interposed between the observer and the photosphere, as Father Secchi would have it, les soliers. Nor are the spots formed by the matter heated gaseous matter, which the eruption projects upon the solar disk. It is similar to the regular and healthy pulsation of the heart as the life fluid passes through its hollow muscles. Could the human heart be made luminous and the living and throbbing organ made visible, so as to have it reflected upon a screen, such as used by the astronomers in their lectures, say, for the moon? Then everyone would see the sunspot phenomenon repeated every second, due to its contraction and the rushing of the blood. And again, that is an emphatic no, that does not happen. Like, you can take, there is a pulsation, right? There is a slight, and I mean a very, very slight pulsation of the sun where it is emanating electromagnetic energy in a visible light spectrum. And so the fluctuation of that light makes it appear as though it is contracting and expanding. But that is not actually what's going on. That is merely the photo representative of it. And so, like I just said, we can look at this through satellites every single day. You can sit there all day long and look through the GOES satellite and watch the sun do various things. So we do get to see the sunspots, and they do not repeat every second. That is not a thing that happens at all. In any way, in no way can it be extrapolated that it does. They are there. They move around the entire, as the sun moves, and it takes, I forget how long it takes for the sun to do a complete rotation. I think it's like 5 days. But like, it does its rotation, and it'll go all the way around with it. It is not pulsating. It is not doing anything even slightly related to a heart, except accepting and moving on electrical discharges. It is said in a work on geology that it is the dream of science that all the recognized chemical elements will one day be found but modifications of a single material element, and sadly that is not the case. Occult philosophy has taught this since the existence of human speech and languages, adding only on the principle of the immutable law of analogy, as it is above, so it is below. That other axiom, that there is neither spirit nor matter in reality, but only numberless aspects of the one ever hidden is, or sat. The homogeneous primordial element is simple and single only on the terrestrial plane of consciousness and sensation, since matter, after all, is nothing else than the sequence of our own states of consciousness. Wrong, and spirit an idea of psychic intuition. This is one of those things that I absolutely emphatically believe the opposite of, right? We are not on an illusory plane. We are here materially. At the direct will of God, I will grant you that. But that doesn't mean that this is an illusion. This is a perfectly formed, very solid existence for the entire time that you are here. It will continue when you are gone, and it was here long before you were in this incorporation, right? And you may have been incorporated other times, but in this incorporation, it is not at all an illusion. Even on the next higher plane, that single element, which is defined on our earth by current science as the ultimate decomposable constituent of some kind of matter, would be pronounced in the world of a higher spiritual perception as something very complex indeed. Our purest water would be found to yield, instead of its two declared simple elements of oxygen and hydrogen, many other constituents undreamt of by our terrestrial modern chemistry. Guess what? Once again, emphatically wrong. Now, does that mean that water cannot be contaminated? No, it doesn't. This is contaminated water, right? I drink my tea every day for my lungs, right? I'm clearing up this phlegm. You know, I might notice I don't have to clear my throat quite as much, right? But this is dirty water. The base constituent of this is H2O, but inside of that I have lemon, and I have thyme, and I have rosemary. I've got mint, I've got cayenne, I've got turmeric, right? I've got several things, some honey. I've got several things floating around inside of here. It is an emulsion, but it is not pure water, right? Pure water is indeed hydrogen times 2 with 1 oxygen. That is the fullness of it, the entirety of water. Now, can you have salt water with some NaCl attached to it? Absolutely. But then it's not pure water, it's salt water. So, for this entire statement, wrong. As in the realm of matter, so in the realm of spirit. The shadow of that which is cognized on the plane of objectivity exists on that of pure subjectivity. The speck of the perfectly homogeneous substance, the sarcode of the Hegelian monera, is now viewed as the archebiosis of terrestrial existence, Mr. Huxley's protoplasm. That would be the primitive form of plasma, or the primitive understanding thereof. Footnote. Unfortunately, as these pages are being written, the archebiosis of terrestrial existence has turned, under a somewhat stricter chemical analysis, into a simple precipitate of sulfate and lime. Hence, from the scientific standpoint, not even an organic substance. Sic transit gloria mundi. And Bathybius Haeculi has to be traced to its pre-terrestrial archebiosis. This is the first perceived by the astronomers at its third stage of evolution and in the secondary creation, so-called. But the students of esoteric philosophy understand too well the secret meaning of the stanza. Brahma has essentially the aspect of Prakriti, both evolved and unevolved. Spirit, O twice born, initiate, is the leading aspect of Brahma. The next is a twofold aspect of Prakriti and Purusha, both evolved and unevolved, and time is the last. Anu is one of the names of Brahma, as distinct from Brahmanutar, and it means atom. Aniyamsam, anayamsam, anayasam, the most atomic of the atomic, the immutable and imperishable, Achyuta Purushottama. Surely then, the elements known to us, be their number whatever it may, as they are understood and defined at present, are not, nor can they be, primordial elements. Once again, wrong. She is talking specifically about oxygen and hydrogen here, right? She is talking specifically about carbon and nitrogen here. And you're wrong. They are, indeed, primordial elements. They can be altered, right? We have altered the chemicals, right? Fat Boy was one of those, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we were definitely changing some elements there. But we have done so in an experimental nature. If you were unaware, we have created gold from another heavy metal. But no, it was not lead. It was bismuth. You know, the stuff they put in Pepto-Bismol? That stuff. They have changed that into gold, and it took an extraordinary amount of energy to do so, but they were able to change the ionic bonds through a bombardment process, and they were able to change the primordial element from one into another, but that was by the process of letting loose some of the ions, right? The electrons and the neutrons and the protons. And so, that's not like something easy to do. That's not something that you're just going to do in a retort on your counter, right? It takes a lot of energy to do that. And so they are primordial in the sense that they cannot be changed outside of something along that nature, right? Like even lightning by itself is not enough to do that. You have to bombard it with radiation in order for that to happen. Those who were formed from the curds of the cold radiant mother and the fire seed of the hot father, who are one, or, to express it in the plainer language of modern science, those elements had their genesis in the depths of the primordial fire mist, the masses of incandescent vapor of the irresolvable nebulae. For, as Professor Newcomb shows in his Popular Astronomy, on page 444, resolvable nebulae are not a class of proper nebulae. More than half of those, which were at first mistaken for nebulae, he thinks, are what he calls starry clusters. The elements, now known, have arrived at their state of permanency in this fourth and fifth race. They have had a short period of rest before they are propelled once more on their upward spiral spiritual evolution, when the living fire of orcas will dissociate the most irresolvable and scatter them into the primordial one again. And this is entirely possible, but it is entirely not possible too. This is purely speculation. Meanwhile, the occultist goes further, as has been shown in the commentaries on the 7 stanzas. Hence, he can hardly hope for any help or recognition from science, which will reject both his anayamsam and anayasam, the absolutely spiritual Adam, and his manasaputras, mind-born men, by resolving the single material element into one absolute irresolvable element, spirit, or root matter, thus placing it at once outside the reach and province of physical philosophy. He has, of course, but little in common with the orthodox men of science. He maintains that spirit and matter are 2 facets of the unknowable unity, their apparently contrasted aspects depending a. on the various degrees of differentiation of the latter, and b. on the grades of consciousness attained by man himself. This is, however, metaphysics, and has little to do with physics, however great in its own terrestrial limitation that physical philosophy may now be. Nevertheless, once that science admits, if not the actual existence, at any rate, the possibility of the existence of a universe with its numberless forms, conditions, and aspects built out of a single substance. Footnote. In his World Life, page 48, in the appended footnotes, Professor Winchell says, "It is generally admitted that at excessively high temperatures matter exists in a state of dissociation. That is, no chemical combination can exist, and would appeal, to prove the unity of matter, to the spectrum, which in every case of homogeneity will show a bright line, whereas in the case of several molecular arrangements existing, in the nebula, say, or a star, the spectrum should consist of 2 or 3 bright lines. This would be no proof either way to the physicist-occultist who maintains that beyond a certain limit of visible matter, no spectrum, no telescope, and no microscope are of any use. The unity of matter, of that which is real cosmic matter to the alchemist, or Adam's earth, as the Kabbalists call it, can hardly be proved or disproved by either the French savant Dumas, who suggests the composite nature of the elements on certain relations of atomic weights, or even by Mr. Crookes' radiant matter, though his experiments may seem to be best understood on the hypotheses of the homogeneity of the elements of matter and the continuity of the states of matter. For all this does not go beyond material matter, so to say, even in what is shown by the spectrum, that modern eye of Siva, of physical experiments. It is of this matter only that H. St. Clair de Ville would say that when bodies, deemed to be simple, combine with one another, they vanish, they are individually annihilated, simply because he could not follow those bodies in their further transformation in the world of spiritual cosmic matter. Verily, modern science will never be able to dig deep enough into the cosmological formations to find the roots of the world's stuff or matter, unless she works on the same lines of thought as the medieval alchemists did. And once again, Mrs. Blavatsky, you have been proven wrong. The electron microscope has allowed us to do what you have just stated is impossible. All right. Of a universe with its numberless forms, conditions, and aspects built out of a single substance, it has to go further, unless it admits the possibility of one element or the one life of the occultist. It will have to hang up that single substance, especially if limited to only the solar nebulae, like the coffin of Muhammad, in midair, though minus the attractive magnet that sustains the coffin. Wait. I'm unfamiliar with this. This is the very first time I have ever heard of the coffin of Muhammad. It is the very first time that I have ever heard that the lid is suspended. If that is a real thing, remind me to look that up later, because I definitely want to check that out. Fortunately, for the speculative physicist, if unable to state with any degree of precision what the nebular theory does imply, we have, thanks to Professor Winchell and several disagreeing astronomers, been able to learn what it does not imply. Footnote. Vide supra. Work life. Okay. Unfortunately, this is far from clearing even the most simple of the problems that have vexed and still do vex the men of learning in their research after truth. We have to proceed with our inquiries, starting with the earliest hypotheses of modern science, if we would discover where and why it sins. Perchance it may be found that Stallo was right after all, that the blunders, contradictions, and fallacies made by the most eminent men of learning are simply due to their abnormal attitude. They are, and want to remain, materialistic quantum and yet the general principles of the atomo-mechanical theory, the basis of physics, are substantially identical with the cardinal doctrines of ontological metaphysics. I'm going to pause right here and just say that I know that this is pronounced meme now, but I am pretty sure that it was not intended in the same fashion and was therefore pronounced differently then. This is more of a French pronunciation than us with meme. So, just in case it got your panties in a twist that I pronounced that wrong, some people are very adamant about that. Now, it's like GIF and GIF, right? Obviously, it is a graphics interface, so it is a GIF. The fundamental errors of ontology become apparent in proportion to the advance of physical science, concepts of modern physics. Science is honeycombed with metaphysical conceptions, but the scientist will not admit the charge and fight desperately to put atomo-mechanical mask on purely incorporeal and spiritual laws in nature, on our plane, refusing to admit their substantiality even on other planes, the bare existence of which they reject a priori. It is easy to show, however, how scientists, wedded to their materialistic views, have endeavored, ever since the days of Newton, to put false masks on fact and truth. But their task is becoming with every year more difficult, and with every year, also, chemistry, above all the other sciences, approaches nearer and nearer the realm of the occult in nature. It is assimilating the very truths taught by occult science for ages, but hitherto bitterly derided. Matter is eternal, says the esoteric doctrine, but the matter the occultists conceive of in its laya, or zero state, is not the matter of modern science. That is definitely true, not even in its most rarefied gaseous state. Mr. Crookes's radiant matter would appear matter of the grossest kind in the realm of the beginnings, as it becomes pure spirit before it is returned back to its first point of differentiation. Therefore, when the adept or alchemist adds that, though matter is eternal, for it is pradhana, yet atoms are born at every new manvantara, or reconstruction of the universe, it is no such contradiction as a materialist who believes in nothing beyond the atom might think. There is a difference between the manifested and unmanifested matter, between pradhana, the beginningless and endless cause, and prakriti, or the manifested effect. Yes, because we know that matter actually exists, we suppose that there is an afterlife. That is a distinction that you're going to have to wrap your head around, right? I'm a spiritualist. I believe in God emphatically. I believe in the Holy Spirit with zero doubts, according to my definition, not necessarily the Baptist one. But that is pure speculation, right? Even me, believing that emphatically with my whole chest and the entirety of my being, it is still speculative for me to say that there is a God, right? She is being speculative here, but she has no compunction about not being clear about that, right? This is me saying I am right because I believe I am right. There is a difference between manifested and unmanifested matter. We don't have any evidence whatsoever of unmanifested matter. None. Zero. Nada. None. Nilch. Net. No. Says the sloka. That which is unevolved cause is emphatically called by the most eminent sages pradhana, original base, which is subtile prakriti, vis-a-vis that which is eternal and which is at once is and is not a mere process. Footnote. Book 1, Chapter 2, Vishnu Purana, fits Edward Hall's translation. That which, in modern phraseology, is respectively referred to as spirit and matter, is one in eternity as the perpetual cause. It is neither spirit nor matter, but it, rendered in Sanskrit, tad, that. All that is, was, or will be, all that the imagination of man is capable of conceiving. Even the exoteric pantheism of Hinduism renders it as no monotheistic philosophy ever did. For in superb phraseology, its cosmogony begins with the well-known words, "There was neither day nor night, neither heavens nor earth, neither darkness nor light, and there was not aught else apprehensible by the senses or by the mental faculties. There was then one Brahma, essentially Prakriti, nature, and spirit. For the two aspects of Vishnu, which are other than his supreme essential aspects, are Prakriti, and spirit, and Brahman. When these two other aspects of his no longer subsist, but are dissolved, then that aspect whence form and the rest, in example, creation, proceed anew, is dominated, time, twice born. And again, that is entirely speculation. It may be true, you may believe it, I may believe it, but it is still speculation. It is that which is dissolved, or the illusionary dual aspect of that, the essence of which is eternally one, that we call eternal matter or substance. Vide in Part 2, Primordial Substance and Divine Thought. Formless, sexless, inconceivable, even to our sixth sense, or mind. Footnote 2. Vide preceding Section 9, Life, Force, and Gravity, quotation from Anugita. In which, therefore, we refuse to see that which monotheists call a personal anthropomorphic God. How are these two propositions, that matter is eternal, and the atom periodical and not-eternal, viewed by modern exact science? The materialistic physicist will criticize and laugh them to scorn. The liberal and progressive man of science, however, the true and earnest scientific searcher after truth, e.g. the eminent chemist, Mr. Crookes, will corroborate the probability of the two statements. For hardly has the echo of his lecture on the Genesis of Elements died away. The lecture which, delivered by him before the chemical section of the British Association at the last Birmingham meeting, so startled every evolutionist who heard or read it. Then there came another one in March last, 1888. Once more, the president of the Chemical Society brings before the world of science and the public the fruits of some new discoveries in the realm of atoms, and these discoveries justify the occult teachings in every way? Does it really? They are more startling, even, than the statements made by him in the first lecture, quoted later, and deserve well the attention of every occultist, theosophist, and metaphysician. This is what he says in his Elements and Meta-Elements, thus justifying Stallow's charges and provision with the fearlessness of a scientific mind which loves science for truth's sake, regardless of any consequences to his own glory and reputation. We quote his own words. Permit me, gentlemen, now to draw your attention for a short time to a subject which concerns the fundamental principles of chemistry, a subject which may lead us to admit the possible existence of bodies which, though neither compounds nor mixtures, are not elements in the strictest sense of the word. Bodies which I venture to call meta-elements. To explain my meaning, it is necessary for me to revert to our conception of an element. What is the criterion of an element? Where are we to draw the line between distinct existence and identity? No one doubts that oxygen, sodium, chlorine, sulfur are separate elements, and when we come to such groups as chlorine, bromine, iodine, etc., we still feel no doubt, although where degrees of elementicity admissible, and to that we may ultimately have to come, it might be allowed that chlorine approximates much more closely to bromine than to oxygen, sodium, and sulfur. Again, nickel and cobalt are near to each other, very near, though no one questions their claim to rank as distinct elements. Still, I cannot help asking what would have been the prevalent opinion upon chemists had the respective solutions of these bodies and their compounds presented identical colors, instead of colors which, approximately speaking, are mutually complementary. That's an interesting note. With the distinct nature, I'm going to try to remember to look that up. Would their distinct nature have even now been recognized? When we pass further and come to the so-called rare earths, the ground is less secure under our feet. Perhaps we may admit scandium, ytterbium, and others of the like, sort of two-elemental rank. But what are we to say in the case of praseodymium and neodymium, between which there may be said to exist no well-marked chemical difference, their chief claim to separate individuality being slight differences in basicity and crystallizing powers, though their physical distinctions, as shown by spectrum observations, are very strongly marked? Even here we may imagine the disposition of the majority of chemists would incline towards the sides of leniency, so that they would admit these two bodies within the charmed circle. Whether in doing so they would be able to appeal to any broad principle is an open question. If we admit these candidates, how in justice are we to exclude the series of elemental bodies or meta-elements made known to us by Kruse and Nielsen? Here the spectral differences are well marked, while my own researches on didymium show there also a slight difference in basicity between some, at least, of these doubtful bodies. In the same category must be included the numerous separate bodies into which it is probable that yttrium, erbium, and salmurium, and other elements, commonly so called, have been and are being split up. Where then are we to draw the line? The different groupings shade off so imperceptibly the one into the other that it is impossible to erect a definite boundary between any two adjacent bodies, and to say that the body on this side of the line is an element, while the one on the other side is non-elementary, or merely something which simulates or approximates to an element. Wherever an apparently reasonable line might be drawn, it would no doubt be easy at once to assign most bodies to their proper side. As in all cases of classification, the real difficulty comes in when the borderline is approached. Slight chemical differences, of course, are admitted, and up to a certain point are well-marked physical differences. What are we to say, however, when the only chemical difference is an almost imperceptible tendency for the one body, or of a couple, or of a group, to precipitate before the other? Again, there are cases where the chemical differences reach the vanishing point, although well-marked physical differences still remain. We solved that problem with the electron microscope. Here we stumble onto a new difficulty. In such obscurities, what is chemical and what is physical? Are we not entitled to call a slight tendency of a nascent amorphous precipitate to fall down and advance to another a physical difference? And may we not call colored reactions, depending on the amount of some particular acid present and varying according to the concentration of the solution and to the solvent employed, chemical differences? I do not see how we can deny elementary character to a body which differs from another by well-marked color or spectrum reactions, while we accord it to another body whose only claim is a very minute difference in basic powers. Having once opened the door wide enough to admit some spectrum differences, we have to inquire how minute a difference qualifies the candidate to pass. I will give instances from my own experience of some of these doubtful candidates. And here, the great chemist gives several cases of the very extraordinary behavior of molecules and earths, apparently the same, and which yet, when examined very closely, were found to exhibit differences which, however imperceptible, still show that none of them are simple bodies, and that these 60 or 70 elements accepted in chemistry can no longer cover the ground. Their name, apparently, is legion, but as the so-called periodic theory stands in the way of some unlimited multiplication of the elements, Mr. Crookes is obliged to find some means of reconciling the new discovery with the old theory. The periodic theory is the actual accurate one. That theory, he says, has received such abundant verification that we cannot lightly accept any interpretation of phenomena which fails to be in accordance with it. But if we suppose the elements reinforced by a vast number of bodies slightly differing from each other in their properties, and forming, if I may use the expression, aggregations of nebulae where we formerly saw, or believed we saw, separate stars, the periodic arrangement can no longer be definitely grasped. No longer, that is, if we retain our usual conception of an element. Let us then modify this conception. For element, read elementary group, such elementary groups taking the place of the old elements in the periodic scheme, and the difficulty falls away. In defining an element, let us not take an external boundary, but an internal type. Let us say, e.g., the smallest ponderable quantity of yttrium is an assemblage of ultimate atoms, most infinitely more like each other than they are to the atoms of any other approximating element. It does not necessarily follow that the atoms shall all be absolutely alike among themselves. Yes, it does. The atomic weight which we ascribe to yttrium, therefore, merely represents a mean value around which the actual weights of the individual atoms of the element range within certain limits. But if my conjecture is tenable, could we separate atom from atom? We should find them varying within narrow limits on each side of the mean. The very process of fractionation implies the existence of such differences in certain bodies. Now, what he is talking about here is isotopes, right? With the exception of isotopes, every single element is indeed exactly the same, but you can have isotopes. Now, what is an isotope? An isotope is the individualized element missing or with an extra electron. So, for instance, say, we'll go with hydrogen because it's got more than one, right? You have two nucleus, or you have two neutrons, two protons, and two electrons in a normal hydrogen unit. An isotope of hydrogen, however, can contain two protons and two neutrons, but either one or three electrons. It is through the process of ionic bonding which makes it an isotope. And so what he is talking about is a real thing, but his understanding of it wasn't correct, and that is fine. We are looking back through the lens of history. We have the elemental or the atomic microscope. We can see atoms, right? That's a big concept for some people, but just like space, it is something true. So we know now what they were speculating about then. And he wasn't far off, right? But he was trying to make the isotopes its own atom, and that's just not how it works. Thus, fact and truth have once more forced the hand of exact science and compelled it to enlarge its views and change its terms, which, masking the multitude, reduce them to one body, like the septenary Elohim and their host, transformed by the materialistic religionists into one Jehovah. Replace the chemical terms molecule, atom, particle, etc., by the words host, monads, devas, etc., and one might think the genesis of gods, the primeval evolution of manvanteric intelligent forces, was being described. But the learned lecturer adds something still more suggestive to his descriptive remarks, whether consciously or unconsciously, who knoweth? For he says the following. Until lately, such bodies passed muster as elements. They had definite properties, chemical and physical, They had recognized atomic weights if we take a pure dilute solution of such a body, yttrium for instance, and if we add to it an excess of strong ammonia, we obtain a precipitate which appears perfectly homogeneous. But if instead we add very dilute ammonia in quantities sufficient only to precipitate 1/2 of the base present, we obtain no immediate precipitate. If we stir up the whole thoroughly so as to ensure a uniform mixture of the solution and the ammonia, and set the vessel aside for an hour, carefully excluding dust, we may still find the liquid clear and bright, without any vestige of turbidity. After 3 or 4 hours, however, an opalescence will declare itself, and the next morning a precipitate will have appeared. Now let us ask ourselves, what can be the meaning of this phenomenon? The quantity of precipitant added was insufficient to throw down more than half of the yttria present. Therefore, a process akin to selection has been going on for several hours. The precipitation has evidently not been effected at random, those molecules of the base being decomposed which happened to come into contact with a corresponding molecule of ammonia. For we have taken care that the liquid should be uniformly mixed, so that one molecule of the original salt would not be more exposed to decomposition than any other. If, further, we consider the time which elapses before the appearance of a precipitate, we cannot avoid coming to the conclusion that the action which has been going on for the first few hours is of a selective character. The problem is not why a precipitate is produced, but what determines or directs some atoms to fall down and others to remain in solution. Out of the multitude of atoms present, what power is it that directs each atom to choose the proper path? We may picture to ourselves some directive force passing the atoms one by one in review, selecting one for precipitation and another for solution, till all have been adjusted. And again, this is not entirely incorrect, but it is not a good understanding of what is going on. This was speculation, and once again, we know what it is. Because of the ionic bonds and the way that the isotopes are formed, some of them are more susceptible to becoming the precipitate. Right? They are more likely to be ionically bonded. If you increase the concentration, you are increasing the chance for that ionic bond to change. So some of them are more susceptible, but the higher the concentration becomes, the more susceptible all of them become. The chlorine, in this case, changing the ionic bond. And so there is an explanation. It's not some creature sitting there inside of the solution saying, you get to go and you don't, you get to go and you don't. Right? There is a selection process, but it is by the Holy Spirit, not necessarily by any directing spirit. The italics in the above passage are ours. Well may a man of science ask himself, what power is it that directs each atom, and what is it that character should be selective? Theist would solve the question by answering God, and would solve nothing philosophically. Occultism answers on its own pantheistic grounds and refers the reader to a subsequent section, gods, monads, and atoms. The learned lecturer sees in it that which is his chief concern, the finger post and the traces of a path which may lead to the discovery and the full and complete demonstration of an homogeneous element in nature. He remarks, in order that such a selection can be effected, there evidently must be some slight differences between which it is possible to select, and this difference, almost certainly, must be one of basicity, so slight as to be imperceptible by any test at present known, but susceptible of being nursed and encouraged to a point where the difference can be appreciated by ordinary tests. Occultism, which knows of the existence and presence in nature of the one eternal element, at the first differentiation of which the roots of the tree of life are periodically struck, needs no scientific proofs. It says, ancient wisdom has solved the problem ages ago. Aye, and just as well, mocking reader, science is slowly but as surely approaching our demands of the occult. It is forced by its own discoveries to adopt nolens volens, or phraseology and symbols. Chemical science is now compelled, by the very force of things, to accept even our illustration of the evolution of the gods and atoms, so suggestively and undeniably figured in the caduceus of Mercury, the god of wisdom, and in all the allegorical language of the archaic sages, says a commentary in the Esoteric Doctrine. The trunk of the Asvatthata, the tree of life and being, the rod of the caduceus, grows from and descends at every beginning, every new manvantara, from the two dark wings of the swan, Hansa, of life. The two serpents, the ever living in its illusion, spirit and matter, whose two heads grow from one head between the wings, descend along the trunk, interlaced at a close embrace. The two tails join on earth, the manifested universe, into one, and this is the great illusion, O Lenu. Everyone knows what the caduceus is, already modified by the Greeks. The original symbol, with the triple head of the serpent, became altered into a rod with a knob, and the two lower heads were separated, thus disfiguring somewhat the original meaning. Yet it is as good an illustration as can be for our purpose, this Laya rod entwined by two serpents. Verily, the wonderful powers of the magic caduceus, were sung by all the ancient poets, with a very good reason for those who understood the secret meaning. Now, I want to point out that this image looks an awful lot like a double helix. Now, what says the learned president of the Chemical Society in Great Britain? In that same lecture, which has any reference to or bearing upon our above-mentioned doctrine. Very little, only this and nothing more. In the Birmingham address already referred to, I asked my audience to picture the action of two forces in the original protyle, one being time, accompanied by a lowering of temperature, the other swinging to and fro like a mighty pendulum, having periodic cycles of ebb and swell, rest and activity, being intimately connected with the imponderable matter, essence, or source of energy we call electricity. Now, a simile like this affects its object if it fixes in the mind the particular fact it is intended to emphasize, but it must not be expected necessarily to run parallel with all the facts. Besides the lowering of temperature with the periodic ebb and flow of electricity, positive or negative, requisite to confer on the newly born elements their particular atomicity, it is evident that a third factor must be taken into account. Nature does not act on a flat plane. She demands space for her cosmogenic operations, and if we introduce space as the third factor, all appears clear. Instead of a pendulum, which, though to a certain extent a good illustration, it is impossible as a fact, let us seek some more satisfactory way of representing what I conceive may have taken place. Let us suppose the zigzag diagram not drawn upon a plane, but projected in space of all three dimensions. What figure can we best select to meet all the conditions involved? Many of the facts can be well explained by supposing the projection in space of Professor Emerson Reynolds' zigzag curve to be a spiral. This figure is, however, inadmissible, inasmuch as the curve has to pass through a point neutral as to electricity and chemical energy twice in each cycle. We must therefore adopt some other figure. A figure of 8, or lemniscate, will foreshorten into a zigzag just as well as a spiral, and it fulfills every condition of the problem. The spiral is actually closer to true. Again, the double helix. A lemniscate for the evolution downward from spirit into matter, another form of a spiral, perhaps in its re-evolutionary path onward from matter into spirit, and the necessary gradual and final reabsorption into the Laya state, that which science calls in her own way the point neutral as to electricity, etc., or the 0 point. Such are the occult facts and statement. They may be left with the greatest security and confidence to science to be justified someday. Let us hear some more, however, about this primordial genetic type of the symbolical caduceus. Such a figure will result from three very simple simultaneous motions. First, a simple oscillation backwards and forwards, suppose east and west. Secondly, a simple oscillation at right angles to the former, suppose north and south, of half the periodic time. In example, twice as fast. And thirdly, a motion at right angles to these two, suppose downwards, which in its simplest form would be with unvarying velocity. If we project this figure in space, we find on examination that the points of the curves, where chlorine, bromine, and iodine are formed, come close under each other. So also will sulfur, selenium, and tellurium, again phosphorus, arsenic, and antimony, and in like manner other series of analogous bodies. It may be asked whether this scheme explains how and why the elements appear in this order. Let us imagine a cyclical translation in space, each evolution witnessing the genesis of the groups of elements which I previously represented as produced during one complete vibration of the pendulum. Let us suppose that one cycle has thus been completed, the center of the unknown creative force in its mighty journey through space having scattered along its track the primitive atoms, the seeds, if I may use the expression, which presently are to coalesce and develop into groupings now known as lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. What is most probably the form of track now pursued? Were it strictly confined to the same plane of temperature and time, the next elementary groupings would appear to have been those of lithium, and the original cycle would have been eternally repeated, producing again and again the same 14 elements. The conditions, however, are not quite the same. Space and electricity are as at first, but temperature has altered, and thus, instead of the atoms of lithium being supplemented with atoms in all respects analogous with themselves, the atomic groupings which come into being when the second cycle commences form, not lithium, but its lineal descendant, potassium. Suppose, therefore, the vis genetrix traveling to and fro in cycles along a lemniscate path, as above suggested, while simultaneously temperature is declining and time is flowing on. Variations which I have endeavored to represent by the downward sink. Each coil of the lemniscate track crosses the same vertical line at a lower and lower points. Projected in space, the curve shows a central line, neutral as far as electricity is concerned, and neutral in chemical properties. Positive electricity on the north, negative on the south. Dominant atomicities are governed by the distance east and west from the neutral central line. Monatomic elements being one remove from it, diatomic 2 removes, and so on. In every successive coil, the same law holds good. Now, this speculation right here is one that we are currently re-engaging. And if you saw the Terrence Howard, Joe Rogan interview, this is the only point of that interview that made any sense whatsoever, was when he was talking about this, how the doubling of each particular element can be attributed in a spiral fashion, exactly like is being described here. And like that was the only thing that even remotely made sense in what Terrence Howard was talking about. And I know somebody is going to flame me. Terrence is a genius. No, he is not. But he did have this one good point, and it was this, and that is probably going to be where the periodic table actually goes next, is the division according to this. And again, that is me speculating, so take it as you will. And, as if to prove the postulate of occult science and Hindu philosophy that, at the hour of the pralaya, the two aspects of the unknowable deity, the swan in darkness, Prakriti and Purusha, nature or matter in all its forms and spirit, no longer subsist but are absolutely dissolved. We learn the conclusive scientific opinion of the great English chemist, who caps his proofs by saying, We have now traced the formation of the chemical elements from knots and voids in a primitive formless fluid. We have shown the possibility, nay, the probability, that the atoms are not eternal in existence, but share with all other created beings the attributes of decay and death. That didn't stand the test of time. Occultism says amen to this, as the scientific possibility and probability are for it facts, demonstrated beyond the necessity of further proof or any extraneous physical evidence. Let's let that sit for just a second. Demonstrated beyond the necessity of further proof or any extraneous physical evidence. That is not conceded at all. Nevertheless, it repeats with as much assurance as ever. Matter is eternal, becoming atomic its aspect only periodically. This is as sure as that the other proposition, which is almost unanimously accepted by astronomers and physicists, namely, that the wear and the tear of the body of the universe is steadily going on, and that it will finally lead to the extinction of the solar fires and the destruction of the universe, is quite erroneous on the lines traced by men of science. There will be, as there ever were in time and eternity, periodical dissolutions of the manifested universe, but a partial pralaya after every day of Brahma, and b, an universal pralaya, the Mahapralaya, only after the lapse of every Brahma's age. But the scientific causes for such dissolution, as brought forward by exact science, have nothing to do with the true causes. However that may be, occultism is once more justified by science, for Mr. Crookes said, "We have shown, from arguments drawn from the chemical laboratory, that in matter which has responded to every test of an element, there are minute shades of difference which may admit of selection. We have seen that the time-honored distinction between elements and compounds no longer keeps pace with the developments of chemical science, but must be modified to include a vast array of intermediate bodies. Meta-elements. We have shown how the objections of Clerk Maxwell, weighty as they are, may be met, and finally, we have adduced reasons for believing that primitive matter was formed by the act of generative force, throwing off at intervals of time atoms endowed with varying quantities of primitive forms of energy. If we may hazard any conjectures as to the source of energy embodied in a chemical atom, we may, I think, premise that the heat radiations propagated outwards through the ether from the ponderable matter of the universe, by some process of nature not yet known to us, are transformed at the confines of the universe into the primary, the essential motions of chemical atoms, which, the instant they are formed, gravitate inwards, and thus restore to the universe the energy which otherwise would be lost to it through radiant heat. If this conjecture be well founded, Sir William Thomson's startling prediction of the final decrepitude of the universe through the dissipation of its energy falls to the ground. In this fashion, gentlemen, it seems to me that the question of the elements may be provisionally treated. Our slender knowledge of these first mysteries is extending steadily, surely, though slowly. By a strong and curious coincidence, even of our septenary doctrine seems to force the hand of science. If we understand rightly, chemistry speaks of 14 groupings of primitive atoms: lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. And Mr. Crookes, speaking of the dominant atomicities, enumerates 7 groups of these, for he says, "As the mighty focus of the creative energy goes round, we see it in successive cycles sowing in one tract of space seeds of lithium, potassium, rubidium, and caesium; in another tract, chlorine, bromine, and iodine; in a third, sodium, copper, silver, and gold; in a fourth, sulfur, selenium, and tellurium; in a fifth, beryllium, calcium, strontium, and barium; In a sixth, magnesium, zinc, cadmium, and mercury. In a seventh, phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, and bismuth, which makes 7 groupings on the one hand, and after showing in other tracts the other elements, namely aluminum, gallium, indium, and thallium, silicon, germanium, and tin, carbon, titanium, and zirconium. He adds, while a natural position of the neutral axis is found for the 3 groups of elements relegated by Professor Mendeleev to a sort of hospital for incurables, his 8th family, there would be 8. It might be interesting to compare these 7 of the 8th family of incurables with the allegories concerning the 7 primitive sons of Mother, infinite space, or Aditi, and the 8th son rejected by her. Many a strange coincidence may thus be found between those intermediatelings, named meta-elements or elementoids, and those whom occult science names their numenoir, the intelligent minds and rulers of these groupings of monads and atoms. But this would lead us too far. Let us be content with finding the confession of the fact that this deviation from absolute homogeneity should mark the constitution of these molecules or aggregations of matter, which we designate elements, and will perhaps be clearer if we return in imagination to the earliest dawn of a material universe, and face to face with the great secret, try to consider the processes of elemental evolution. Thus, finally, science, in the person of its highest representatives, in order to make itself clearer to the profane, adopts the phraseology of such old adepts as Roger Bacon, and returns to the protyle. All this is hopeful and suggestive of signs of the times. Indeed, these signs are many and multiply daily, but none are more important than those just quoted. For now, the chasm between the occult, superstitious, and unscientific teachings and exact science is completely bridged, and one, at least, of the few eminent chemists of the day is in the realm of the infinite possibilities of occultism. Every new step he will take will bring him nearer and nearer to that mysterious center, from which radiate the innumerable paths that lead down spirit into matter, and which transform the gods and the living monads into man and sentient nature. But we have something more to say on this subject in the following section. And that's going to bring us to the end of the solar theory. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. We have the lens of history to look back and understand more than they did then. We have the periodic table, and I do not believe that it is full, right? It is not finished. There are still some innovations to happen. I'm not the one to do them, but what Terrence Howard was talking about is actually probably going to wind up being it. The divisions do fall along several different classifications, and they appear to be multiplicities of each other. And so that classification will probably work, and there will probably be 8 of them. Hopefully I've been clear all the way through this, but today, about the difference between speculation and known. Right? They were speculating. There's nothing wrong with speculating. The problem is when you try to pass off your speculations as known fact. There is a big difference between speculation and fact, and it is evidence. Right? We do not have evidence of God. I don't care what you say. Your personal evidence does not count. My personal evidence does not count. I've given several accounts of them. Right? I'm on record talking about how I believe in God, but it is still speculation because I cannot prove to you through evidence that is a true thing. That is something that we have to keep in mind as we go through these, because most of what she is talking about, right, the understanding that is perfectly sure, nobody was there for that. That was somebody speculating in the exact same way that we are doing now 10,000 years ago. They were guessing, and they probably got pretty close. They may have even had some greater knowledge that we do not know. But evidentially, we do not have any evidence that there is a period of nothing. Right? We do not even have evidence that this universe started. We assume that it did because we are in it, but we do not have the evidence of it. The Big Bang Theory shot out the door. It is done. It is dying. They are holding on to it desperately, but it doesn't work. It has been proven not to work, but science won't allow that proof to be published. That is the problem. Our speculations are great. You can speculate on anything that you want to, but don't try to pass it off as fact unless you can evidentially prove it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said here, or if you want to remind me of the things I need reminding of. Drop it in the comments below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing right here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit's Take. Peace.